Good morning, y'all.
Good morning.
It is 9 o'clock, which means the time is upon us. We are blessed to be joined by Susan Warner-Smith here this morning. She's starting a 2-week series on women in Christianity. There's a handout over here. Susan's a retired pastor in our Presbyterian who worked at Indianola Pres, and I'm sure many other places that I don't know about. And some of you know her, some of you don't. But we're blessed to be joined by Susan, so let's welcome her.
Oops, I lost it. I'm going to just stick it in.
Now you're on.
It's easier. Oh, yes. Oh, that would help us by head. Can I come in? Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So far. You can.
Yes.
So far. Yeah. So far, okay. Did everybody get one of the handouts? Yes.
Okay, it's all you.
So, I was in October, I had done this presentation at the ALS program at Westminster Chamber, and Jeannie Ozian was there, and they thought it would be great if I could come here to Covenant. And so it's my pleasure to be here and be able to offer this up for you. Now, when I was invited to do this for the ALS program, the topic was women in Christianity. And that's a huge topic, to say the least. I mean, after all, Christianity's been around for 2,000 years. It's a global religion. It spans everything from Roman Catholicism to the Anglican Communion to the PCUSA to Christian Science to snake handlers down in Appalachia. So I decided we needed a game plan, and here's what we're going to be doing. First, we're going to limit ourselves to Western Europe and America, as that's where my education and experience lie. And secondly, I am not going to talk about how women have been marginalized over the centuries. I am not going to talk about Salem witch trials. But what I am going to do is make this really a celebration of women in Christianity. And 20 women for 20 centuries and another quarter. These are my choices for today, but given another time, it might have been 20 other women. I don't pretend to be in any way an authority on all of these women. I learned a lot myself in doing the research for this presentation. It was an ambitious task, and I'm going to be throwing a lot of information at you, but I hope when all is said and done, you will have felt a sense of celebration and appreciation as we lift up these extraordinary women and give thanks for their faith and service and their courage and their witness. Now, to celebrate them, I'm going to use art, painting, sculpture, architecture, music, poetry, writings, and prayers. And your associate Megan Lear, she agreed to do the prayers and readings for me over the next 2 weeks so that you don't have to just listen to me as the only one droning on for the entire time. And I think everybody's gotten the outline that I distributed, which includes all the names of the women that we're going to be discussing and when there will be these interludes of music and readings. And you also have the words to the songs and hymns that we'll hear so that you can follow those words if you would like. Now, where it says break in that list of women, that's where we'll break today, and then we'll do the second half, of course, next week. Now, hopefully, we will be able to, whoops. first thing we're going to do is listen to a hymn written in 1980 by a woman named Linda Wilberger Egan, and it is called The First One Ever. And as you might guess, those firsts were all women. And I particularly like this recording because we have this lovely young woman who has a lovely voice singing this hymn.
Jesus was loving, Mary was very loving, Galilee, and blessed is she who believes. Oh, blessed is she who believes in the Lord. Oh, blessed is she who believes. She was very loving of Galilee, and blessed is she who believes. The first one ever to know the Messiah, Jesus himself, he was a Samaritan true love, and blessed is she who perceives. Oh, blessed is she who perceives the Lord. Oh, blessed is she who perceives. 'Twas a Samaritan woman who drew the well, and blessed is she who perceives. Well, first ones ever to know of the rising of Jesus is going to be a very joy and gladly, and blessed are they who sing. Oh, blessed are they who sing, the Lord. Oh, blessed are they who sing. They will bear joy and gladly, and blessed are they who sing.
So it seems logical that we have to begin with Mary. She was, after all, the first one ever to know of the birth of Jesus. And we're looking here at a 15th century Netherlandish altarpiece by Robert Campin, which is located today in the Cloisters Museum in New York. And among the many things that could keep us here talking about this work of art for the rest of our time is that it is the very first to depict the Annunciation to Mary that she will bear the Christ child, taking place in a contemporary bourgeois living room. Mary is shown as a modern housewife. Underneath this bourgeois setting, however, is a far more complex story than first appears to the eye, for almost nothing is without important meaning. Even though the details of this altarpiece, were we to look at it more closely, make very clear her virginity, she unequivocally is represented as a young maid, a wife, and a soon-to-be mother. Let's not forget, Mary went through 9 months of being pregnant. Here, we see her meeting her cousin Elizabeth, who also is pregnant with a child who will become John the Baptist. Mary was not only pregnant for 9 months, but she gave birth to the baby Jesus. She gave birth with all that entails as well. And this painting of the Nativity by George de la Tour represents that very real moment of giving birth, but also a holy moment as no other, with light that's used to indicate this holiness. Jesus, born of Mary, is the light of the world, as we read in the Gospel of John. Thus Mary gave birth, as all mothers have since we first walked this earth. She nurtured her baby and raised her son. This Madonna and child is just one of thousands of paintings seeking to reveal the bond between Mary and her child Jesus. This one was painted by Raphael in the early 16th century. Raphael was the champion of the subject matter, having painted at least 30 representations of the Madonna and child, all noted for their grace and idealized beauty and tenderness. We find Mary at the crucifixion as well, weeping at the foot of the cross. She wept, and then after his entombment, she mourned the loss of her son. But I want to return for a few minutes to the painting of Mary visiting her cousin Elizabeth, because that encounter may represent the most important moment in Mary's spiritual journey other than the birth of Jesus. Mary, among her many qualities, was a prophet. When they meet, the child in Elizabeth's womb leaps, and she says to Mary, "Blessed is the fruit of your womb, and blessed is she who believed that there would be a fulfillment of what was spoken to her by the Lord." Mary's response is what has become known as the Magnificat. These words have been read and reread and have been set to music by some of the greatest composers, and its words should make the rich and powerful shudder in their boots and comfort and reassure the poor and the hungry. "My spirit rejoices in God my Savior," says Mary. "He has scattered the proud, he has brought down the powerful from their thrones, he has lifted up the lowly and filled the hungry with good things, he has sent the rich empty away." Mary's song, the Magnificat, is a radical call to social justice and to compassion among humankind. Mary was a maid from Galilee. She was a housewife, she was a mother, but she was uniquely the mother of Jesus Christ, and her prophetic voice echoes its message to us here in the 21st century world today. We heard in our hymn that the first one ever to know Jesus as Messiah was a woman whom Jesus met when he stopped at a well in Samaria. Now, we often think of Peter as the first one to recognize Jesus as Messiah, but in fact, at least in the Gospel of John, we learn that the first one was not a man, but a woman. Jesus was on his way back to Galilee, and I guess the easiest route took him through Samaria. And he comes to what was known as Jacob's well, and tired and thirsty, he sits down to rest. A woman comes to draw water from the well, and she and Jesus engage in a conversation. What is significant is that this is the longest conversation Jesus has with anyone in the Gospels, and the person to whom he speaks is both a woman and a Samaritan. Now, the Samaritans were considered outcasts by the Israelites because following the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 CE, they had turned their back on the restoration of this sacred city and joined forces instead with Syria in a war against the Jews. The significance of Jesus having a prolonged conversation with a Samaritan woman can be traced back to the earliest times of Christianity, as witnessed in this painting from the 4th century catacombs of Via Latina in Rome. Contrary to common beliefs, the catacombs were not used as hiding places from persecution, but were primarily sites for Christian burial. As faithful followers of Jesus Christ who were laid to rest in their burial chambers, Jesus' remarkable life and deep compassion are remembered and honored in this representation of the woman who was the first to recognize Jesus as Messiah, the one who it was believed would deliver humankind from destruction and bring peace and reconciliation at the last. Mary Magdalene was a follower of Jesus, and she and other women traveled with him and his disciples, serving and supporting him along the way. She was at his crucifixion, and while all four Gospels differ in some of the details about the resurrection, Mary Magdalene is there on all four accounts. She is of major importance in Christian history, but over the centuries she has been misunderstood, misinterpreted, mythologized, and conflated with other Marys who appear. It was Pope Gregory the Great who, at a Good Friday Mass in 591, unfortunately identified Mary Magdalene as being the unnamed sinner with the alabaster jar who appears at Simon the Pharisee's house and anoints the feet of Jesus. And then shortly thereafter, Gregory went further and identified her sin as lust. I'm not sure how he knew that, but anyway, that's what he said. And that message stuck until more recent research has developed a more refined version of this important woman in Christian history. Now here we see two slides. One is a sculpture of a repentant Magdalene carved by Donatello in the 15th century, and clearly here she is Mary Magdalene, the sinner. But we also see a 21st century icon of Mary Magdalene at the tomb with Jesus, meeting him in a garden and recognizing him as the resurrected Christ. Mary Magdalene's importance in the history of Christianity cannot be overstated. In the Middle Ages, her bones were believed to reside in the church at Basilea. It became one of the major starting points in northeastern France for pilgrimages to Santiago de Compostela, which ranked with Jerusalem and with Rome as the most important holy sites for those on pilgrimage. Pilgrims came from all over Europe to be near these holy relics, which brought comfort and healing as they passed by, and this magnificent church was built in her honor. Mary Magdalene was a follower of Jesus, was present at the crucifixion, and she was among the first ones ever to witness the resurrection of Christ. From the very beginning of Christianity, women have been there, assuming significant roles, breaking boundaries, witnessing to the Christian message, and they have been essential to the trajectory of this religion.
Good to say this name. A blessing by whom?
Christine Walters, painter. Yes, and say, including who she is.
Christine Walters Painter is the online abbess for Abbey of the Arts, a virtual monastery. Hear this blessing from her book about Mary entitled Birthing the Holy. Holy Mary, Queen of all saints, you dance with mystics and lovers from throughout the ages, those wise and well ones beyond the veil who reach toward us, encouraging us onward, whispering words of solace. Remind us each day to call upon these sisters and brothers of holiness to help us know we are never alone, but always surrounded by the love of thousands. You gather the saints around you in a great circle of presence, radiating their care into our lives. Support us in our journey to sainthood. Help us to become who we truly are, releasing the masks and expectations of others, so we might shine more brightly and join in the wondrous cosmic dance.
So the trajectory then continues, and if we move forward in the New Testament, we find women critical to the ministry of Paul as he spread the good news across Asia Minor and into Europe. Harold Copping published his illustrated Bible in 1910, and in it he included a painting, which you see here, of a disciple named Priscilla. This picture may remind you of your Sunday school experience, or maybe you taught Sunday school and used pictures by Copping to illustrate Bible stories that you were teaching. Here's Priscilla, who worked alongside her husband Aquila as a faithful minister of Christ. In the book of the Acts of the Apostles, we learn how Priscilla and Aquila met Paul in Corinth, where they established the Corinthian church. Later, they left Corinth to plant another church with Paul in Ephesus. In both Corinth and Ephesus, these churches congregated in their homes, which was evidence of kindness, welcome, and hospitality in the early growth of the church. What is especially significant is that Priscilla was a teacher as well. In the book of Acts, we read about a young preacher named Apollos who believed in John the Baptist's prophecies, but he didn't understand the death and resurrection of Jesus. So we are told that Priscilla and Aquila explained, quote, explained the way of God more adequately, unquote. We might imagine Priscilla as one of the earliest women ministers of the church who committed her life, her resources, her spirituality, and her brains to witness to and further the mission of Jesus Christ. Also in the book of Acts, we meet a woman named Tabitha, or Dorcas, depending upon whether you use the Aramaic or Greek version of her name. Now she's more familiar as Tabitha, who was raised from her deathbed by Peter. And you see here an illustration of this in this fresco, which is part of a series in the Brancacci Chapel in Florence that focuses on the life of, sorry folks, Peter. Yes, a man. But I wanted to change our focus onto Tabitha because she has a story to tell as well. The English artist William Charles Thomas Dobson has chosen to stress another aspect of Tabitha's life. Dobson was part of the Nazarene movement that was formed in the early 20th century with its roots in the teachings of John Wesley and the Pentecostal Church. And in this tradition, stress is placed on the power of the Holy Spirit to sanctify and transform the human heart, making it capable of loving God and loving neighbor in the truest and deepest sense of the word. And here in line with those teachings, Dobson chooses to depict Tabitha as a devoted disciple of Jesus. And in fact, the word disciple used for her in the book of Acts is distinctive because it's the only place in the New Testament where the feminine form of this word is used. The main thing about this disciple for our purposes today is that Dorcas, or Tabitha, lived out her discipleship as a woman devoted to good works and acts of charity. Her example reminds us today of what the mission of the church is really about. It's not so much about high theology, arguing fine points about the nature of God, or poring over books with fine print to learn the nuances of theological argument. That mission is very simply to respond to the needs of others. But here in this painting, we see Tabitha, or Dorcas, delivering good deeds to those in need. We're now going to listen to a hymn by Kathleen Thomerson, another woman composer. She was music director, organist, teacher, and composer. And she
this hymn
Probably may very well be familiar to you.
I want to walk as a child of the light. I want to follow Jesus. God set the stars to give light to the world. The star of my life is Jesus. In him there is no darkness at all. The night and the day are both alike. The Lord is the light of the city of God. Shine in my heart, Lord Jesus. I'm looking for the coming of Christ. I want to be with Jesus. When we have won with patience the race, we shall know the joy of Jesus. In him there is no darkness at all. The night and the day are both alike. The Lamb is the light of the city of God. Shine in my heart, Lord Jesus.
I love that hymn. Are you familiar with that one?
Yeah.
Yeah. I love it. The two women that you now see on the screen represent Saints Perpetua and Felicity. This particular icon was made by the Given Institute, which is a more recent order for women in the Catholic Church that was founded on the trust that all we have has been given to us by God. Our faith, our hope, our love, our gifts, our destiny, our lives, everything. Now, Saint Perpetua and Felicity are in many ways an unlikely pair. Both of them are from 3rd century Carthage in North Africa. But Perpetua was a noble woman and Felicity a slave. They met as catechumens, that is, two women learning about the Christian story and hoping to be baptized. But they were arrested instead when the Roman Emperor Septimus Severus forbade anyone from becoming a Christian. Perpetua and Felicity and all the other catechumens were condemned to death and beheaded during the Roman Games. Their story is unique because we have a record of it through a diary that Perpetua kept while she was awaiting execution. Now, exactly how that diary was preserved, I don't know. There was a recent article in Christian Century about her, which I'll refer you to if you have some more interest in who she was. But in any event, this diary that she kept has been preserved, and the account is unusual for it is an account of early church martyrdom, but more especially because it's one of the earliest first-person narratives by a woman writer. Perpetua was married with an infant son, and even though her father tried to persuade her to renounce Christianity in order to save her life, she refused. She was baptized along with the other catechumens. It seems surprising, but she actually was allowed to bring her infant son into the dungeon until he could be weaned. And meanwhile, Felicity was 8 months pregnant at the time of their imprisonment, and eventually she delivered a baby girl who was adopted by a Christian sister. She was, at the time, mocked for her pain, but Perpetua's diary reports that Felicity responded by saying, and I quote here, "Now it is that I that suffer what I suffer, but then there will be another in me who will suffer for me, because I also am about to suffer for him." The lady that you see here may at first look to you like a nun, but a nun she was not. This is a representation of Monica, the mother of St. Augustine of Hippo, by a Spanish artist and student of El Greco. She was born in what today is Algeria in North Africa. She grew up in an austere Christian household and remained a devout Christian throughout her life. Monica was a person of deep inner resources, was relentlessly supportive of her son, and a person who shared those convictions and resources with Augustine. She was frustrated, even angered by her son's explorations in other forms of religion and other forms of Christianity. And the tension that this created between them ultimately led to Augustine's attempt to sneak out of Africa and escape to Rome. But Monica got wind of his trip, followed him to Rome, and from there even to Milan. But it was in Milan where Augustine heard Ambrose preach and was so inspired that he converted to Christianity and was ultimately baptized with Monica at his side. The two of them reconciled at last and left to return to Africa, but Monica unfortunately died along the way. And Augustine's grief subsequently inspired his writing of his Confessions. And there he traces with great passion his spiritual journey and ultimate conversion to Christianity, making it abundantly clear that it was his mother, Monica, who dominated and inspired his interior life. Now we move to a whole other part of the Western world. Bridget of Kildare, who lived between about 451 and 525, she's one of the most beloved saints within the Celtic tradition of Christianity. The Celtic scholar John Philip Newell describes her as, quote, "the saint who loves the earth, who reveals the sacredness of the feminine, who models female leadership, inspires poets and musicians, midwives at new beginnings, and extravagantly embodies compassion and boundless generosity towards the poor and those who seek refuge. We need her among us again today," unquote, he says. We know that she founded a monastery in Kildare around 480, as well as several others, but otherwise we really don't know a lot about her. The first biographies of her were written over 100 years after her death, and they're full of myth and legend. But one of the wonderful legends about her is represented here in this marvelous painting by the 20th century Scottish artist John Duncan. The legend is that Bridget was a barmaid at the inn in Bethlehem. And she was the one who was told not to welcome anyone who came to the door, neither offering a room to sleep in or any food and drink. But when Mary and Joseph arrive at the door, Bridget is so taken with Mary's beauty and obvious pregnancy that she gives the couple some bread and water. But when Bridget returns to the kitchen, she discovers her bread and water have been replenished. She looks out the window and she sees a light shining in the barn, and she rushes out to find Mary in labor. Bridget kneels down, and in that moment, she becomes the midwife at the birth of Jesus. She holds the baby high, gives thanks for his birth. Then, get this, she even suckles him at her breast. So in this way, Bridget becomes symbolically the representation of the birth of Christianity in Ireland, the mother of Christ to the Irish people. And to many of the Irish, she's more sacred than even Mary, the mother of Jesus, and as such, she embodies the sacred feminine. St. Bridget has an unusual, beautiful, and mysterious history, and a monumental influence upon a certain branch of Christianity. One of the most intriguing women of the Middle Ages was Hildegard Bingen, who lived from about 1098 until 1179. And she was, in her own way, kind of a rock star of the time. She was a Benedictine nun, a mystic, a writer, an artist, a healer, a theologian, and a musician. She was born in Mainz, Germany in 1098, the youngest of 10 children, and at the age of 8, she was entrusted to the care of a holy woman named Jutta, and with her entered the Benedictine monastery at Diezy-Bodenberg on November 1st, 1112. There, she became part of a growing community of women, although the convent was attached to a monastery of monks, of course. In 1136, following the untimely death of Jutta, Hildegard became Mother Superior of the nuns. And as the community grew, she sought more independence for herself and the nuns, and ultimately moved them to Rupertsberg Monastery in Bingen in 1150, and then 15 years later, she founded Eibingen Abbey. From her youngest years, Hildegard had what she described as visions of God. But it was not until she was 42 that she says she received a vision in which God instructed her to write them down. Several illustrated writings were the result, describing and illustrating the visions in detail. And the result is the book that we know as Tibius, which is a major theological and cosmological work detailing 26 divine visions that she received, exploring themes of creation, the nature of God, humanity's place in the cosmos, etc., all illustrated with intricate illuminations. And here are a few of them. Here she's receiving a vision. Here's an illustration of the cosmos. And here are just a couple of more visions from her book. But Hildegard was also a healer. Her writings include advice on healing for everything from eyes, ears, teeth, digestion, liver, gallbladder, nerves. The writings are full of sophisticated insights into herbal medicine that are appreciated even in our world today. In our day of technology and modern medicine. And yes, she was a musician as well. Much of her music has been recorded today and is available here. To sample it, I've chosen to play this setting of Ave Maria that was written by her. But if you're interested in learning more about her, there is an excellent movie that's entitled Vision. So I recommend that to you if you'd like to learn more in depth about her life. Well, that's what we're taking our break today, but I see we have plenty of time. If you have any comments or questions or.
Well, Susan,
Yes.
I do know that you have some study in art history.
Yes.
So I thank you for sharing that particular perspective, not of just women in these old art pieces, but of the way in which we don't hear as much about them. And to have the story of their life is really, I really appreciate it very much. I surprised you, didn't I? It's not.
Well, my journey was a little, because my undergraduate and I have got a master's degree in art history. But what I learned from doing that, and then later I was for several years a docent at the cloisters in New York, and working with the curators there, it was like they can't see the forest or the trees or whatever the metaphor is. That they're worried about the cleaning on the stained glass windows, but not what the stained glass why they use stained glass. What was the sort of spiritual reason for that? And so I became really interested in the intersection of faith and art, and that there's something much deeper that's going on here. It's not all about egg tempera and yeah, whatever the medium might be, but that more often than not, these are people of faith. They're commissioning these works or creating these works. I think about, Bernini, who worked at St. Peter's for so many years and was a devoutly religious person and created all these magnificent works of art, but it was all prepared through prayer and the Eucharist and all that to sort of sustain him in his job. So anyway, then when I got my PhD, it was in medieval spirituality, but once again, I was focusing on the Cistercians, the whole other thing, and I don't know if you know the Cistercians. Well, Thomas Merton, most people know who, a lot of people know who Thomas Merton is, and he's sort of a more 20th century manifestation of the Cistercian movement. The Cistercians actually are still a living order, and one of the few that survived from all the 12th century reforms that went on. But in any event, I was really interested in Cistercian aesthetics, and so I wrote a dissertation on sort of the spiritual grounding of Cistercian aesthetics, and so I just held a long fascination with the faith that undergirds so much of the art that gets thrown at you in an academic setting.